I was at my grandmother's house helping my grandmother move furniture around. She became my mother figure after the death of my mother when I was a young child, and I have been staying with her ever since my car accident. My grandmother helped nurse me back into health, so I made an effort to alleviate her of any and all physical tasks. I felt it was the least I could do. It was in the attic when I accidentally knocked over a box. The box was filled with VHS tapes, with the farthest dating back to 1990. All that was written on them was the year. There was a TV in the attic as well because we used the attic as more like a functioning room than a storage space, so I decided to play the oldest tape. I expected to see happy memories, home videos, scenery, anything other than this. The video starts with whoever is holding the camera filming a woman sitting alone at a small table at a coffee shop. She's reading. The camera was zoomed in on her hair glowing in the light, fixed. The tape then skips to a new setting, in what looks like downtown Chicago somewhere. I can see the back of the same woman from before walking down the street, oblivious to the person trailing and filming behind her. The sky is now a dark gray. I can see lights from passing cars glinting off her shiny boots. The camera is clambering and rubbing up against the jacket of the cameraman. He or she's not far from her, but is far enough away to show that he or she's not with her, clearly stalking her. The scene lasted maybe 5 minutes of the monotonous walking until it shifted to the woman now bound and stowed in the trunk of the car. She was taped up, unable to speak. All I could hear was the sound of heavy rainfall accompanied by her screaming and crying. Her muffled panic broke my heart in two. My spine became frozen. I couldn't open my eyes any wider. Any moment the film could shift to something so much more grotesque, so morbid, so life-changing, and I could do nothing but watch in horror. I saw a black glove-covered hand sprout from behind the camera, slam the trunk door closed, trapping her inside. It's now clearly night. The next scene skips to the woman, now beaten and bloody while tied to a chair. The location looks to be a warehouse somewhere, the only light coming from a single fluorescent bulb above the woman, illuminating pools of crimson red blood at her feet. The camera is steadily held, so much that it seems to be propped up by a stand. I can hear the poor woman moaning in pain underneath the tape covering her mouth. I can also hear something shifting around on the concrete, like someone adjusting their stance. It seemed manic. I could hear clambering of metal, like tools being packed or unpacked from a bag. My stomach now fully turned. The stalker then walks into frame, showing only his back. His head was completely covered in a balaclava. He carried a blade in his right hand. My heart completely halted. The stalker held her drooping head up, tilted her face upward, and began to slice her throat from her left ear all the way to the right. She squirmed and gargled in her desperate and useless attempt to survive. I had never seen so much blood in my life. The killer then takes off his mask and stares into the camera, flashing a toothy grin. The film then abruptly stops. I was held in place by my now shot nerves. My blood slowed into stillness, completely discoloring my body into an almost corpse-like white. My grandmother was watching me. She shakingly tried to console me from across the room, struggling to form words through the river of tears streaming down her face. She said she didn't want me to ever be reminded of who I was before my accident.
My father used to work at a video rental store back in the 90s. I was a part-time worker when I left school to help him out with putting tapes into shelves and picking up trash, putting them into bins. The job itself was really boring, but I have to do it to make Dad happy. 8 years later, the rental stores would be coming to an end because most people nowadays use Netflix or other streaming services. Dad was all right with it, but he was a little sad that he was abandoning the old store. We had one last job to do, and that was to pack everything away, including the tapes and DVDs into boxes. I was in my dad's office, and I was collecting his favorite videotapes. I put them in a box as usual, but something told me there was more. I decided to check the drawers, and that's when I found them. 11 videotapes, stacked like a Jenga tower, collecting dust for God knows how long. Each one had a label on it, and the titles were written in a black Sharpie. The titles themselves were very simple, yet odd. The first one was titled Trash Can. The second one was titled Hammer. The third one was titled Dog Food. The fourth one was titled as Jester. The fifth one was titled as Boogie. The sixth one was titled as Dead Meat. The seventh was titled as Let Her In. The eighth was titled as Wrath. The ninth was titled as Silence. The 10th was titled as It Had No Reason. And finally, the 11th was titled as Sinful. I was about to call out to my dad, but I remembered that if I found any tape or DVD that looked suspicious, I should discard it immediately. But I was just really curious about these videotapes, so I hid them in my school bag and continued helping Dad until our job was done. By the time we got home, I waited until dinner was finished and my parents were asleep. I turned on the VHS player I had in my room for quite some time and turned on the TV as well. I inserted the first tape into the slot as I sat on my bed, waiting for something interesting. The video begins with a trash can in the middle of a room, hence the name, until the lid was being slowly lifted up by something. It turned out to be a man's head. I could tell by his eyes that he looks nervous about something. He stares at the camera for another 5 minutes before he pulls out a sign that read, "Why are you watching?" The video ends with a man looking at something to his right and immediately hiding back into the trash can in a panic before it was cut to black as the tape ejected itself out. I had a good chuckle. I thought it was some weird shit until I inserted the second tape. The video begins with 3 boys. They looked about 12 or 13. They wore nothing but loincloths and had metal buckets over their heads. They sat on a tree log, doing nothing at all until one of the boys brings out a hammer and starts hitting his bucket with it, before passing on to the boy next to him, and then the cycle repeats. This goes on for 7 minutes before they all stop and fall off the tree log onto their backs as the video ends. I sat on my bed with a confused look. What the hell was that about? I mumbled to myself, shrugging it off and inserting the third tape. This one is a POV. It shows the cameraman cooking some weird meat on a frying pan. The camera switches to 9 Labrador puppies who claw at the cameraman's legs, then switches back to the frying pan. The cameraman puts the meat into a large bowl and the puppies immediately dig into it. That's when I noticed something in the background. I grabbed my remote and rewinded a little and found something that shocked me. It was the corpse of an adult Labrador and a man, both of them disemboweled. I got goosebumps from that scene, but calmed down when the video ended. I also shrugged it off and told myself it was only special effects. The fourth tape was more bizarre than the last 2. It begins with a woman playing on a pipe organ. The woman looks like she's wearing some kind of anthropomorphic cat costume, but it looks a bit too real. The song she was playing on the pipe organ was Knockin' on Heaven's Door by Guns N' Roses. It was perfectly accurate and sounded pretty good. Then she missed a few notes and quickly looks back at something that was obviously distracting her. The camera then slowly pans over to a chubby woman whose skin is completely painted white. She was wearing a pink bikini and red roller skates. She also had a rainbow afro and clown makeup with an additional clown nose. She was doing funny yet bizarre dances while the woman kept playing, all the while having this abnormally large ear-to-ear smile. I was starting to question these videotapes. None of them made any sense at all. It was already 2 a.m. and I needed sleep badly, but I continued to watch these tapes. The 5th video shows a creepy Tim Burton-esque puppet. Its wooden skin was gray. It wore black overalls with a black and white striped shirt underneath it. It had only had large cartoonish eyes and a normal puppet mouth. Michael Jackson's PYT plays in the background as the puppeteer makes the puppet dance in a very weird way. Minutes later, the music becomes a bit distorted, and the puppeteer suddenly moves the puppet in a violent manner to the point that the puppet is violently slammed to the floor repeatedly until its hollow head cracks open, causing multiple centipedes to crawl out as the video ended. The 6th one was far more disturbing. It's another POV, but it has night vision. The camera woman talks to the camera in German while exploring the place, saying things like how to play stinks and all. Minutes later, a sound can be heard behind the camera woman. She turns around to see a heavyweight man with a blood-soaked apron and wearing a stitched-up pig's head like a mask. He then brings out a chainsaw and the camera woman begins to run as he starts it and pursues her. During the running scenes, she trips on a cow carcass and the video cuts to black for 10 minutes before showing the camera woman hanging on a meat hook, her lower extremity missing. I just wanted to puke. I was beginning to reconsider watching these goddamn tapes. I really wanted to stop, but some urge caused me to watch the 7th tape. This video is footage from a doorbell security camera. Nothing happens until 6 minutes later. A woman wearing a hospital gown and paper bunny mask walks up to the camera and rings the doorbell numerous times. That doesn't work, and the woman starts violently pounding on the door, while yelling in French to be let in. I knew this because I learned French at school. After minutes of continuous banging, she stops, looks at the camera before taking off her mask, and looking at the camera again with an angry glare. Half of her face was burned, but not as bad as Christopher Nolan's Two-Face. It ends with a woman grabbing a hammer out of nowhere and destroying the camera. There were 4 left to go. It's now 3:30 a.m. My parents have not woken up yet, and they weren't deep sleepers. I ignored it and played the 8th tape. The video begins with a bald, muscular man in a padded cell. He is seen walking back and forth 3 minutes before he screams loudly and starts to violently punch the walls until his knuckles are bloodied and bruised. He looks up at the camera and quietly says, "You're an idiot. You shouldn't be watching," before snapping his own neck as the video ends. Something tells me that this man was talking directly at me. It almost sounded like he was trying to warn me, like the guy from the first tape. I played the 9th video. It begins with a lanky woman, her skin painted white and with long black hair. She looked a bit similar to the clown girl from the 4th video, except she looked like a mime. She wore a black bikini and black roller skates, along with a black beret hat. The mime is in some kind of alleyway performing a strange act. It took me a minute to understand that she was pretending to be putting a noose around her neck and choking. But the acting seemed too realistic, as she was actually choking to death. The video ends with the mime rolling over to the camera and falling on top of it. 2 left now. It's 3:46 a.m., and I'm almost sleepy. I played the 10th tape, and this one was another security camera POV in an interrogation room with 2 men, one being an investigator, and the other a suspect wearing a purple bowler hat. They looked at each other for a couple of minutes before the suspect asked the investigator why he was brought in. He replies by saying that he murdered a man and his dog, but spared the puppies. Wasn't expecting to hear that. The suspect replies that it made him do it. The investigator asked who, and he replies again with, "An angel from hell." The investigator stops talking for a second before asking him about it, and did it have some reason. The suspect quietly says that it had no reason at all and begins to chant, "No reason." The video ends with the suspect pulling out a pistol and shooting the investigator dead while he was still chanting. The last and 11th tape was inserted into the slot as I prepared myself for God knows what could be on the screen, but it was all dark static. Considering that it was too late, I tried turning off the TV, but it didn't work. I unplugged it, but the static was still there. It remained there for a good 30 seconds before it showed me a horrifying and heartbreaking image. My parents, both still in their beds, their necks cut open with these smiles. That's when I heard my door creak open. I looked back, and there it was. A dark, blue-skinned man in a rental store employee uniform, holding a kitchen knife in his left hand and a video camera in its right, staring at me with black eyes and a skeleton-like smile. I was ready to die when I woke up to my mom's voice. I found myself in the hospital bed with my worried parents next to me, still alive. I asked them what happened, and Dad told me that he found me in my room having a seizure on the floor. I was apparently in a coma for 25 hours. I then confessed about the 11 tapes I've stolen. I was expecting my dad to get pissed, but he gave me a confused look and then a sudden realization. He tells my mom to wait outside, and it was now me and my dad. "You're lucky, son," he said with a deep and intense voice. "How am I lucky?" I asked him. "Those tapes. How the hell do I explain it? Let's just say they are cursed," he replied. He stops to think a while before he says, "We nearly became prisoners."